It is my pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker, Professor S.M. Hussain. Uh, Professor Hussain obtained his master's, MPhil, and PhD degrees in geology from University of Madras. He has 34 years of research experience, and his main area of interest includes biodiversity of marine, brackish water, and freshwater ostracod. He has been also in active in the field of ecology, paleoecology, paleobiogeography, and tsunami studies. He also works in foraminiferal systematics, ecological studies, and sequence stratigraphy. He has over 90 research publications to his credit. Dr. Hussain is currently heading the Department of Geology, University of Madras. He is in the profession of teaching for last 30 years and is engaged in teaching postgraduate students the subject of paleontology, micropaleontology, sequence stratigraphy, and petroleum geology. He has supervised 13 students for PhD and 29 students for MPhil. He have discovered 6 new ostracod species or genera, which are included and incorporated in the International Ostracod Catalog published by American Museum of Natural History, USA. Also, new species of ostracod is named after him in 2005 to honor his work related to ostracod studies. With this brief introduction, I invite Professor Hussain to speak to us on topic ostracods, the lesser known paleo-environmental proxy.
Sir, can you please share your screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Sweta, for your nice introduction. Respected MP Singh Saab, Dr. Nigamji, Dr. Sudhirji, Dr. VP Mishra, Dr. Parcha, Dr. Rahul Gar, and other Dr. Josna Rai and Dr. Rajini Panchal and other friends. A very good morning to all of you. At the outset, I profusely thank Dr. Rajini for having given me this opportunity to interact with the student community on the International Fossil Day. And we know many of the university departments these days, we are losing the faculty to teach paleontology and micropaleontology, not only in the university departments, but also the affiliated colleges. We don't have sufficient number of teachers to take care of the paleontology and micropaleontology teaching as well as research work. So under these circumstances, in order to popularize the fossil significance and also to attract more number of researchers and students towards the fossil study, on the eve of International Fossil Day, under the aegis of the Paleontological Society of India, Dr. Rajini is organizing. My appreciations to you, Dr. Rajini. And on this occasion, I would like to recollect and sincerely thank my research supervisor and guru, late Professor V. Raghotaman, who has introduced me to this particular group of microfossils, Ostracoda. And at the same time, I also would like to thank late Professor Honnappa from Mysore University and Professor M.S. Manikeri from Karnataka University, Dharwad, retired, and who were initially they helped me and supported me in the identification and in the study of ostracods. So on this occasion, I would like to thank and pay my respects to these my gurus. So yesterday, you have listened to an excellent talk on foraminifera and its applications. And today I'm going to give you an insight, what are ostracods, how they are helpful in the environmental studies. Of course, even though there are good number of foraminiferal researchers are there in India, the osteopoda workers are very less in number. And since because of this, these osteopods, I have given the title that lesser known paleo-environmental proxy. Of course, their environmental implications and other geological implications are well established, but as far as India is concerned, they are being studied in less quantity. And hence, the title is given like this: the osteopoda, the lesser known paleo-environmental proxy. And once you have listened to Dr. Nigam, whoever the next speaker, of course, he cannot talk up to his level, but I will try my best to just, as this is mainly focused, as this particular lecture series is mainly focused for the benefit of the young scholars and students. Of course, I would like to, I try to give my best. Now, outline of my talk is a brief introduction on microfossils and osteopods, and then the utility of osteopoda in ecological and environmental studies, and some of the implications based upon the statistical parameters of osteopod carapace on hydrocarbon occurrence of the sediments, and finally, few slides on how to identify the paleo tsunami or tsunami deposits. Ever since the origin of the earth, the life, origin of the earth is 4,600 million years ago, and from that period till 3,000 million years, there was no life on the earth due to the main reason there was not sufficient oxygen in the earth's atmosphere. And 3,000 million years is considered as a period of oxygen revolution. The life started appearing on the earth in the form of prokaryotes like algae, fungi, bacteria, etc. And whatever the life that existed on the earth till today, it has been classified into two categories. One is paleontology, other one is neontology. Paleontology is nothing but the study of past life. Paleo means ancient, ontos means logos, ontos means life, logos means science. Science of ancient life. And neontology is nothing but the science of the existing life, where whatever the plants, animals, microbes, the present life, that is known as neontology. Of course, we the paleontologists, we need not bother about neontological organisms, and we study the past life, particularly with the help of fossils. And these past life is again divided into two categories. One is the past plant life, which is known as paleobotany, and past animal life, which is known as paleozoology. Under the paleobotany, again, certain microorganisms which are derived from the plants, they are all considered, their size is generally in microns, they are all being clubbed and studied under palynology, study of these micro or tiny or micron-sized organisms. Under the paleozoology, that past animal life, we have the invertebrates, the organisms which do not have the vertebral column, like brachiopoda, pelecypoda, gastropoda, cephalopoda, echinodermata, coelenterata, graptolites, etc. And then you have the vertebrates like the fishes, amphibians, reptiles, and then aves, birds and mammals. So like that, we have the past life in different groups. And then we have the micropaleontology, which I am going to talk in detail in the coming slides. And then what is a microfossil? A fossil which is very tiny in size, whose morphological characters cannot be best studied with your naked eye. And you need to have a stereobinocular microscope for its best, good study, for its better identification. That is known as a microfossil. And these microfossils, ever since their origin, they are being classified into two categories. One is mineral walled group of microfossils, the other one is organic walled group of microfossils. So under the mineral walled group of microfossils, we have calcareous, siliceous, and phosphatic. And the organic walled group of microfossils, we have these organisms. And of course, these are all known things to many of us. And this is the SEM photograph showing the calcareous group of microfossils. This is foraminifera, the calcareous hyaline, porcelain, and the agglutinated foram, and the planktonic foraminifera, and you have the osteropods, and you have the nanoplanktons, coccoliths, discoasters. Under the siliceous group of microfossils, we have the radially symmetrical spumellarians and helmet or cap-shaped nacellarians, and we do have diatoms under the siliceous forms, and the circular centric forms, and the elongate pennate forms, and pennate frustules we call them as. And as far as foraminifera is concerned, we call them as foraminiferal tests, whereas with regard to the osteropods, we call them as carapace. Under the phosphatic group of microfossils, we have a simple bar type, blade type, and then platform type conodonts, and then organic wall group of microfossils. So all these group of microfossils, they have their habits. They are mostly aquatic in nature, except few forms. And when they are in aquatic, they live in planktonic mode, particularly free-floating forms without any locomotory organ. And they live in the photic zone, 0 to 200 meter or 150 meters from the sea surface. These are all the examples. When you come to the benthic forms, the forms which dwell at the bottom of the sea or ocean or a river or a lake, they are the benthic forms. And since they live at the bottom, they are linked to the depth and sediment type and other various physico-chemical parameters. And because they dwell at the bottom of the sediments, and some are infaunal and epifaunal forms, they are very much helpful in delineating or discussing the bottom environments. Whereas these planktonic foraminifers, they live for a short period of time and they serve as good index fossils. They have got more implications on the biostratigraphical studies. And this is the habitat as far as the microorganisms are concerned. You have the marine habitat is the dominant habitat. And among these, you have the intertidal zone, neritic zone, and the oceanic zone, you have the bathyl, abyssal, and hadal zone. Not only the bottom seafloor, and also the bottom, and also the above watered column. It is the habitat of organisms. And then at the marginal marine environment, we have the mangroves. Mangrove habitat is one of the fragile as well as the important habitat for these organisms. Many foraminifers and ostracods, they thrive there. And mangroves, they also serve as very good bioshield against the tsunami and storms. And as far as I just start from the history, from the beginning, for the better understanding of the student community. So, as I told you, these microfossils cannot be studied, cannot be identified with your naked eye like your megafossils, and you need to have a stereobinocular microscope. The microscope is invented by Van Leeuwenhoek in the year 1660, and that started the birth of systematic micropaleontology. And after that, Linnaeus, Carl Linnaeus Systema Naturae, where the binomial nomenclature concept is being proposed, there the species, the organisms are being named, etymology, like genus, species, etc. So in order to name or identify these forms, organisms, particularly with regard to the animals, we have to follow the International Code of Zoological Nomenclature, and with regard to the plants, we have to follow the International Code of Botanical Nomenclature. And this is a stereobinocular microscope which is used in order to identify the foraminifers and ostracods, etc. Whereas this modern polarized light microscope is used to identify certain micron-sized organisms like spores, pollen, diatoms, and coccoliths, etc. And scanning electron microscope. After the invent of the scanning electron microscope, many ambiguity, confusion, error, and overlapping of the species is being avoided, and a lot of errors are being avoided in the naming of these microorganisms. And we can take the microorganism photograph to the required size to 5,000 times, 10,000 times, and also the ultrastructure of the foraminifera and ostracoda can also be taken, and we can give the perfect identification. The basic correct identification, exact identification without any ambiguity, without any confusion or error mistake, and the subsequent interpretation on that particular species will give you a good result. If the identification is wrong, whatever the total interpretation that is being done, then it leads to wrong results. So why these microfossils are so significant when compared to megafossils is because of their size, minute size, and their ubiquitous presence in sediments, and their morphological characters. And many of the microfossils are very sensitive to the environmental changes, and that environmental changes gives you an information with regard to any change in the environmental conditions, past environmental conditions, their abundance and distribution. And even the 100 grams, 10 grams also sometimes will give you, like your nanoplanktons and diatoms will give you a good number of microfossils. So the small quantity of sediment sample gives you good number of microfossils because of their minute size. That is the significance and advantage. Not only that, many catalogs are available for the reference. And this particular figure shows the geological range in time of the microfossils. Say for example, calcareous forms you have algae, Ostracoda, Foraminifera, Bryozoa. They are found to occur in the entire Phanerozoic eon and in the Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic. Whereas pteropods, they are found to, they appeared in the late Cretaceous and late Cretaceous to recent. And similarly, when you come to the siliceous forms, you have the diatoms, oligoflagellates, etc. And they appear at the early Cretaceous and continue to live in the time. And similarly, when you come to the conodonts, in the early Cambrian, they appeared, and at the end of the Triassic, they disappeared. So like that, so this particular figure tells you the geological range in time of different groups of microfossils, and some are very good biostratigraphical indicators. Yeah, so these different groups of microfossils, in which kind of sediments they occur abundantly, rarely, and sporadic. As far as spores and pollen grains are concerned, these are the different, in all type of sediments they are found to occur. Whereas when you study the siliceous group of microfossils like radiolaria or diatoms or whatever it may be, the diatoms, then you have to find out for the siliceous sediments only, not the calcareous sediment. And when you come to the Foraminifera and Ostracoda like that, you have to target, you have to find out the calcareous sediment rather than the siliceous sediments. So like that, this particular table shows you different groups of microfossils, their abundant occurrence and rare occurrence. Yeah, so whatever the ecological database which we generate from the recent forms, the recent organisms, that has to be projected backward in order to find out the paleoecology of that particular older sediments. So based upon the principle of uniformitarianism, present is key to the past. So paleoecological interpretation is based on the present day pattern of sedimentation, chemical cycling, circulation, water mass dynamics of the ocean, and that can be related. So, and you have to relate to the fossil data, I mean the recent forms data to the fossil, and thereby interpret the paleoecology. Similarly, when you come to the biostratigraphical application and the age implication, you have to establish the range zones based upon the index fossils, first appearance and last appearance, then find out the different zones. And these zones will have a specific range in time, and thereby we can give the age of the sediments, concurrent range zone, like that. And let us come to the my group of organisms, ostracods. Ostracods, though they belong to the phylum Arthropoda, which is a megafossil forms, like you have trilobites and other thing under Arthropoda, but ostracods, they classify under micropaleontology because of their size. Size is 0.5 to 1 millimeter. When the ostropod is characterized by the presence of two valves, they are hinged together at the dorsal margin. When two valves are hinged together, then it is known as a carapace. And this carapace will have this size generally. And some Paleozoic ostracods, they have a larger size. There is one species, Gigantocypris agassiz. It grows to a size of 3.4 centimeter, 34 millimeter size. So Paleozoic ostracods are generally larger in size when compared to the Mesozoic and Cenozoic forms. As far as the geological range and time of ostracods is concerned, they are found to occur from Ordovician to recent. And habit, they are mostly benthic forms, sessile, and some are vagrant, and they are infaunal and epifaunal. And there are few, nectons are also there. And they possess 7 pairs of appendages, ostracods. And with the help of the appendage, some of the ostracods, they are able to swim in the water column. So they are the nectonic forms. And as far as the habitat is concerned, they are found to occur in all kinds of aquatic environment, starting from freshwater, river, lakes, ponds, pools, streams, and brackish water, estuary, lagoon, backwaters, mangroves, and in the marine, shallow marine to deep marine. And so these are all the SEM photographs of the freshwater farms. And this figure shows you the ecological niche where these ostracods are found to occur. See, in the lake, in the pond, cypris, like this type of forms are found. And in the riverine environment where river meets the estuary, there also it is a habitat, and hypersaline lagoons. And not only that, in the forest, humid soils and the rice fields, and in the intestines of fishes also, these ostracods are found to occur. And they are diversified in the shallow marine to deep marine. As you go deep marine, their diversity and distribution reduces. And the congenial environment for the ostracod distribution and abundance diversity is shallow marine shelf or neritic environment. So this is the figure tells the stratigraphic position of different groups of different suborders or different groups of ostracods. So as I told you, these Paleozoic ostracods, Paleocopid, Lepidoticopid, Beryticopid, and these are all the forms which are confined to the Paleozoic era only. And of course, Podocopids, they are now very much abundant and highly diversified. They occur in the Ordovician, and slowly their distribution is less in the Paleozoic and mid of Mesozoic, and from mid of Mesozoic, their diversity is increased enormously, and now they are dominant group of microfossils, ostracod microfossils, podocopids. And as I told you, myodocopids, they are the nectonic forms. They are the nectonic forms. With the help of the appendage, they are able to swim in the water column. So these myodocopids are also present, but in the Paleozoic era, they were a little bit diversified, they are abundant, and thereafter, they are very narrowly occurring, and then in the Quaternary time, now they are abundantly occurring. They are diversified. And as far as ostracods are concerned, they will not grow continuously like other organisms. They keep shedding the external shell as they grow, and that process is known as ecdysis. There are about 8 growth stages, which we call instars, and 9th one will be the adult. By taking the, this is the length from anterior to posterior, dorsal to ventral. By measuring these length and height ratio, by preparing a scatter diagram, we can find out the type of the environment in which you get these ostracods. That is known as scatter diagram. Length on x-axis and height on y-axis. By preparing that scatter diagram, we can infer whether that environment is pristine. Generally, in a pristine and unpolluted environment, you are supposed to have a good number of instars. Then when you come to the sexual dimorphism, and these ostracods are exhibiting male and female, 2 types of forms are there. Males have generally longer length, and when compared to the females. Not only that, the females will lay the eggs on the posterior side. There is a brood cavity. In the brood cavity, they lay the eggs and hatch, and offsprings are developed. Thereby, the reproduction is taking place, and the process is known as parthenogenesis. Without the involvement of the male organisms, female itself, they produce the offsprings. Now, let us see, any group of organisms for that matter, they are being controlled by ecological parameters like physical, chemical, and biological parameter. So also the ostracods. So ostracods are also being controlled by few important physical, chemical, and as well as biological parameters. Let us see one after another. Temperature is one of the important parameters. The distribution and diversity of ostracoda is being controlled. So the ostracods inhabit waters of all temperature, starting from cold water to warm water. See, cold deep water forms, which we call them as cyclospheric, and they are the Antarctic Arctic species forms, Arctic. And cold shallow water forms, cryophilic forms, and warm water shallow forms, thermophilic. See, these forms generally they are found to occur in the equatorial region. And equatorial region, and you move away from the equator, temperate region, tropical to temperate region, and from temperate to cold regions, that is Arctic and Antarctic areas. We also have cold deep water as well as cold shallow water forms. And there is one genera, Heterocypris. It can withstand to a temperature of 50 degrees centigrade. Such is its tolerance. The stable isotope of delta 18 and C13 of ostracoda, it provides the information with regard to paleosalinity and paleo temperature of an environment. So this is when you open up these ostracod carapace, and the internal view of the ostracoda is like this. You have the hinge and you have the inner lamella. It is being traversed by numerous pore canals, and you have the muscle scars. And these are all the normal pores. These are all the normal pores. You just have in mind these morphological characters, how these morphological characters are used in order to infer the paleo environmental conditions of a particular area. So this is the SEM photograph showing the surface ornamentation. Ornamentation also, it plays a major role in order to find out the substrate, type of the substrate. Generally, the highly ornamented forms, they prefer to thrive in sandy substrate or silty sand substrate, that is medium to coarse grained substrate. Whereas the smooth forms, unornate forms, they prefer to live in the fine grained sediments like muddy, silty, clayey substrate. So ornamentation has got its significance. And as far as the ostracod attachment is concerned, it is being done by 3 ways. adont hinge, merodont, and amphidont hinge. Generally, adont hinge is seen in the freshwater farms. Freshwater farms, they live in a non-calcic amount of sediments. So there, they get attached, simple attachment will be there. Simple ridge and groove will be there. And when you come to the merodont, you will have 3 elements will be there. And the merodont hinge type can be seen in the estuarine ostracods. And these adont hinge can be seen in the freshwater ostracods, not only in the freshwater, but also in the deep marine ostracods also you can see the adont hinge. And when you come to the shallow marine, neritic or shelf ostracods, there underwater current will be more and turbulence is there. In order to withstand that, these ostracods, they hinge together by a strong hinge structure, which is known as amphidont hinge. So hinge also plays with the help of the hinge, we can infer or deduce the paleo environment. You need not bother about the ostracod species names and everything. Just study the morphology, either ornamentation or hinge structure. All these parameters will give you some information with regard to the paleo environment. Yeah, salinity and depth. Freshwater farms generally, as I told you, smooth, thin farms. Why? Because they don't have calcium carbonate to build their shell, robust and thick, and adont hinge, and absence of caudal process, branched pore canals, and eye spots. And when you come to the brackish water farm, mesohaline, they have weak ornamentation, hinges, merodont, and then certain species, they develop hollow tubercles on the surface of the carapace when moving from the environment of less salinity. Certain freshwater farms, they develop hollow tubercles in calcium-rich water. Then come to the marine environment. Marine farms, they have shallow marine farms, and as I told you, they take the calcium carbonate in order to build their shell thick, strong, robust from the water as well as from the sediment they take, and they build thick shells and with strong amphidont hinge. Pore canal will be branched pore canals, and well-developed eye spots will be there, strong ornamentation will be there, and they're found in medium to coarse-grained sediments. Example, Stratolibris quadrasata. As I told you, deep water farms, they are smooth and thin and weak hinge or adont hinge sometimes, and they don't have eyes because they are they live in a aphotic zone. So no sunlight is available and the animal becomes blind. So then cyclospheric farms, the depth will be more than 1000 meters and the temperature range is 4 to 6 degrees centigrade. These cyclospheric farms generally found to occur in the deep marine and also in the polar regions, Agrinocytheris and Posidoniamicus. And yes, depth and temperature, which these parameters which I have already explained. And there are these benthic ostracods, they are being divided into 2 major groups like cyclospheric and thermospheric, which I have already explained. Here I would like to show the SEM photographs of these cyclospheric forms. So Paracrythella, see the smooth forms and weak ornamentation. And whereas the thermospheric forms, neritic or shallow marine forms, they have a well-developed shell and also the very good ornamentation, Actinocythis scutigera. Then come to the other parameter, that is substrate. Substrate is the important one with regard to the benthic forms, where they dwell, which type of sediment they dwell, and fine-grained. And as I told you, some are infaunal, some are epifaunal. And infaunal forms, they burrow inside and they go live inside the sediments. Silt and clay burrows, sando burrows, accordingly the terminology is given. And epifaunal forms, the fine-grained clay, silt burrow wanderers and sand surface crawlers. Accordingly, the epipolus and episalmon, like that, this terminology is given to that particular ostracod assemblage. And yeah, so the type of the substrate. So the ostracods, they have the smooth, thin, bean-shaped carapaces, swimmers generally. These are the nekton forms. And fine-grained mud dwellers have flattened ventral and wing-shaped carapace because in the clay, silty, and muddy substrate, in order to withstand their stability, on the lateral side, they develop a wing-like alar processes. So that wing-like alar processes can be seen. And by seeing the wing-like alar processes itself, we can say that those organisms lived in the fine-grained muddy substrate. And coarse-grained sand dwellers have thick carapace with coarse ornamentation. Like that, salinity is also another important parameter. Salinity, according to the salinity variation, we have the range, freshwater, brackish water, and the marine water. The salinity range will be, in the case of freshwater, 0.5 parts per thousand, and in the case of brackish water, 0.5 to 30 parts per thousand, whereas in case of a normal sea environment, 35 to 45 parts per thousand, and sometimes hypersaline water bodies like salt pans and other high saline regions in the tropical area, 57 parts per thousand. Under these varied environmental, salinity varied environmental conditions also, these osteropods, they live. So whatever the ecological database that we generate from the recent forms, that database will be very much helpful in order to deduce or infer the paleoecology of the fossil forms. So the shell chemistry of the osteropod carapace, these days, we have to analyze the shell chemistry with the help of the SEM-EDAX, and also sometimes, we have to analyze geochemically and find out the chemistry, and it provides a valuable information with regard to the hydrology, precipitation, and particularly with regard to the lake sediments, where lake sediments, you don't have sufficient calcareous shells there, and osteropods will be available and they'll be much helpful. That is with regard to the physical as well as chemical parameters. Let us see the biological parameter. Biological parameters are nothing but the food supply that is available for the organism to survive there. Food, osteropods generally they feed on algae and atoms, and the other parameter is predation. The higher organism comes and eats away on the lower organism, and without destroying and damaging the entire shell, they just make a drill or make a hole and eat away the soft parts. So in case of osteropods, the predation is being done by two groups. One is gastropod predation, other one is barnacle predation. And gastropod predation is of two kinds. One is muricid, other one is naticid predation. And muricid predation can be seen in the deep marine form, deep marine environments, and they create an oblique hole. They create an oblique hole, and the shape of the hole will be irregular. It is not purely completely circular. Whereas when you come to the naticid gastropod predation, and these gastropods come and make a drill, make a hole and eat away the soft parts, particularly in the shallow marine environment, the shape of the hole will be circular or semicircular, not like irregular in case of deep water forms. And the hole will be vertical, not an oblique hole. So this parameter it can be helpful in order to find out whether it is a deep marine sediment or a shallow marine sediment. And osteropods also helpful in studying the pollution and industrial pollution, domestic and sewage pollution, and sometimes oil slick takes place sometimes. There also we get the information with regard to the kind of a pollution that is entering into the aquatic environment. Yes, and some of the statistical parameters of osteropods, they are helpful in the paleo-environmental studies. Once the paleo-environmental information is obtained, then we can find out whether those sediments are having the potentiality with regard to the hydrocarbon occurrence. So the statistical parameters like carapace valve ratio, degree of pyritization, current index, so on, other parameters. Let us see one after another their implications. And generally in a pristine environment, osteropods, they occur, the color of the osteropod carapace will be light yellow, colorless, and yellow. This type of light colored, pale colored forms indicate that they are found to occur in the oxic environment. Sometimes the environment changes from oxic to suboxic to anoxic, then the color of the osteropod carapace changes from dark green to gray, brown, and sometimes red color. So the coloration of the osteropod gives you an information with regard to the suboxic to anoxic environment condition. Generally, for the generation of the hydrocarbons, we need to have the reduced environment or anoxic environment. Then only the organic matter which is present in the sediments, it will be preserved and it will convert into the kerogen, and thereby it converts into gas or oil depending upon the subsurface temperature and pressure conditions. So next parameter is carapace and valve ratio. And in a basin, when the sedimentation is going on and the aquatic environment is there, in the aquatic environment, these osteropods are assemblages there. After the death of these osteropods, they go and settle down in the sediments. And in the basin, if there is a continuous deposition of the sediment, whatever the dead osteropod carapace is there, it will be preserved as such. It will be immediately being covered with the sediments. And if suppose in case in that basin, if after the death of the organism, if the sedimentation is very slow, and this dead organism is being acted upon by the bacteria and the water current, underwater currents and other things, there is a chance of disarticulation of these osteopod carapace, thereby you get more of open valves. So this particular ratio, closed carapace and open valve ratio, can be directly taken into consideration in order to find out the relative rate of sedimentation in a particular basin. And generally we need to have a immediate faster rate of sedimentation and very thick rate of sedimentation in a sedimentary basin in order to have the hydrocarbon generation, hydrocarbon potential. So this particular parameter is being widely used by McKenzie, Guha from the Eocene, Oligocene basins of Australia and India, Ahmad et al. From the Eocene and Miocene deposits of Lindi, Tanzania, and Guha, Dilip Kumar Guha from ONGC. As I told you in the beginning, many of the osteopods in the oil industry also, they're retiring, and no micropaleontologists, not only in the academic institutions, but also in the research organizations like GSI and ONGC, and we are losing the experts. So that is why we need to train and we need to attract and give more focus towards the student community. And Guha, 1986, he studied the Eocene sediments of Tambe Basin, where he has observed 100% of closed carapaces. So it indicates it's a rapid rate of sedimentation. So then come to the next parameter, degree of pyritization. Generally, the pyrite crystals are formed in a reduced environment or anoxic environment. These pyrite crystals, they go and adhere or agglutinate on the surface of the carapace. So in a sedimentary environment, if you get more of pyritized osteopods, it indicates that those sediments are deposited in a anoxic or suboxic or a reduced environment. So generally, reduced environment is more congenial for the generation of the hydrocarbon. Similarly, the current index. The current index is determined based upon the percentage of adult and juvenile shales, which I have already told you that there are 8 juveniles and 9th one will be the adult. In an undisturbed fauna, both adult and juvenile carapaces will be expected. But when the currents are active, they disturb the ratio of adult and juvenile ratio. So then more of current action is there, considerable aeration resulting in the oxidation, thereby it is not favorable for the generation of the hydrocarbons. So in order to find out the current index, we have to we can take into consideration the ratio between the juvenile and adults. So higher current index is seen in the littoral zone, whereas low index is seen in the lagoonal zone, and lagoonal zone is more favorable for the generation of the hydrocarbons. See, other parameters like compaction ratio, preservation of carapace, all these parameters are also being used, but their efficacy of these parameters like smooth and ornamented, dwarf and normal growth, and the male-female forms, left valve, right valve ratio, all these parameters are there, and their efficacy is not fully established. Still, the research work is going on these osteopod statistical parameters. That is the reason why the title is given as the lesser known environmental proxy of osteopods. Yeah, so all these parameters which I have already explained to you, we have done this study, particularly near Chennai, a fishing hamlet, Karikattukuppam, south of Chennai, and we have gone to the field and collected the surface sediment samples with the help of the Van Veen grab. And these are all the osteopod species which you have recorded. See the predation, natistic predation. But the samples which you have collected is up to 50 meters only. The shallow environment means natistic predation. You can see the gastropod predation in the shallow environment. And we have also numerically counted the carapace and valve ratio of all these osteopod species which we have recorded in the study area, and it is being tabulated here. And this is the histogram. This is the histogram showing the distribution of the open valves as well as carapaces, which tells that carapace ratio is 20 to 25% less when compared to the open valves. So the open valve percentage is more because it implies that the sedimentation rate is slow here. Here, there is no major river that is debouching or bringing the sediments into the Bay of Bengal. Whereas similar kind of study which we have carried out in the further south of Tamil Nadu, in a place called Tambarbarani Estuary, we have collected similar kind of approach we have made. There, the carapaces ratio will be 80 to 85% when compared to the open valves are 10 to 15%. So there in that estuarine environment, the faster rate of sediment is reduced and it is inferred, it is also interpreted that the Tamarvarani brings a lot of sediment, particularly during monsoon time, and it brings and deposits the sediments in the estuarine environment. Then, and another study which we have carried out near Park Strait, this is a lagoon. Here we have collected the surface samples and the core samples also, and this lagoon is a Kaveri Delta area, and it has got distributaries of Kaveri. All these, they bring lot of sediment, particularly during the monsoon time, and it deposits. And not only that, this the Park Strait, this Vullipallam lagoon, it has got a dolphin nose type of shape. That is why here tidal fluctuation will also be more, and the freshwater sediments, continental or terrestrial sediments, are being brought by these distributaries. And there is a kind of a stressed environment exists in this lagoon. Under these stressed environmental conditions, one or two species will be generally present. And in this, we have dominantly Pneumoceratina, more than 90% of the population, followed by Hemicythridia pegi is seen in this lagoon. So this type of inference, the highly stressed lagoonal conditions, one or two species are biologically, they are dominant when compared to the other assemblage. And not only that, we have also carried out the numerical count of these arthropod species which we have recorded in the lagoon, that has been counted and tabulated here. And here, so you see the total number of specimens which we have recorded is 5,017, out of which 4,798 are carapaces, and the rest are open valves. See the ratio. So more carapaces of arthropod species are recorded in this Mullipallam lagoon. It indicates that there is a rapid rate of sedimentation, and rapid rate of sedimentation is can be justified from the distributaries which bring these five distributaries which bring lot of sediment, not only during the northeast monsoon but also during the southwest monsoon. So these are the field photographs of the collection of the surface samples in the lagoon with the help of the graph. And finally, I'm going to another 5 or 10 minutes I'll take. And finally, I'm going to give you an insight with regard to the identification of the tsunami deposits. And we have done a case study from Tamil Nadu as well as from the Andaman area. And we know that the tsunami occurs when a plate subducts and the stress takes place. And because of that, the overlying water gets disturbed and it generates tsunami. And when the tsunami generates at the point of in the open ocean, it will be having a high energy, and it travels at a speed of 700 to 900 kilometers per hour at a speed of aeroplane. And in the open ocean, it will have a wavelength more and wave height less. Yeah, this figure clearly explains you that at a 4,000 meters of water depth in the open ocean, when a high magnitude earthquake takes place, the tsunami generates. And see the wavelength 213 kilometers in the open ocean. As it progresses, as it reaches the coast, the wave, the velocity reduces and wavelength also reduces. This figure clearly demonstrates that at 50 meters, this is the wavelength, at 10 meters. So wave height increases, wave length decreases, wave height increases. After reaching the coast, there is no further medium to travel these tsunami waves, and whatever the energy that is being accumulated by these tsunami waves, they dissipate on the coastal hamlets and the coastal structures and life. And that is the reason why the coastal areas are more vulnerable for the tsunami. And in the process of its travel, the tsunami wave travel, it scoops the shallow marine sediments and deposit on the marginal marine environment or on the coastal areas. Depending upon the topography of the coastal area, sometimes these tsunami sediments or the tsunami wave which drag or which scoop the sediments, and they will be deposited inland up to a distance of 1 kilometer, 1.5 kilometer if the topography is flat. Suppose if the topography is elevated, and these tsunami sediments will not be deposited at a longer distance inland. These are all the some of the photographs, and these are all some of the tsunami photographs. So December 26th, 2004, the tsunami has occurred because of the mighty earthquake and the Burmese plate subducted the Indian plate, and it has generated the tsunami. And immediately we have carried out a field work in the Andaman area, starting from Little Andaman to Port Blair, South Andaman and Middle Andaman and North Andaman. Entire full Andaman area we have made a traverse, and we have collected the surface as well as subsurface samples in the form of core samples in the month of June 2005, and we have collected a few surface samples and several core samples also. And these are the field photographs collecting the core sample in the mangrove area of Middle Andamans, and the collection of core sample in the Middle Andaman Baratang. And you can see some of the field photographs like extensive damage that has taken place to the mangroves in the Baratang area. And sometimes, the subsidence takes place. When the subsidence takes place, the marine water enters. The marine water is entering into the residential areas of the South Andaman, and people are forced to evacuate. And this is a place called Ramapuram where the building, it got collapsed. The one which you are seeing is the first floor. The ground floor is totally got submerged, land subsidence, and near a place called Mayabandar. And the Mayabandar and Diglipur are connected by this bridge on the river, which is constructed on the Kalighat Creek. So the bridge also got dislocated both vertically as well as horizontally. It got damaged, and the transportation is disrupted. And due to tectonic upliftment, some of the corals are seen on the. When we were traveling on the boat, I have taken the photograph, and the tsunami wave. And when we inquired with the local people, they say that 7 meters height, the tsunami wave was there. And then in the Middle Andaman, there is a mud volcano is there, and it start oozing out the mud in the Baratang. And this is another photograph showing the damage to the southern. And this is an area where the land subsidence has taken place, and the saline water has entered, and the freshwater vegetation, they died out because of the entering of the saline water, marine water. So what all these sediment samples which we have collected away from the coast, 500 meters, 700 meters, and 1 kilometer. And these core samples we have subsampled, and we have analyzed for the ostracod fauna. And these are all the ostracod fauna which we have recorded in the samples, in the core samples which we have collected away from the coast of 500 meters, 700 meters, and 1 kilometer. And all these ostracod species are of shallow marine inner shelf species. They are generally found to occur in the 40 to 50 meter of water depth, but they are being recorded on the land. So which implies that the tsunami has brought the sediments and deposited on the coastal inland area. So this particular study we have published in the year 2006 itself in the Current Science. And these are the ostracod species which you have recorded in those core samples and the surface samples which you have collected in the marginal marine environments and the on-land area. And a similar study we have also carried out, but here we have not collected the core sample. We have opened the trenches, pits we have opened, and along the coast of Tamil Nadu. But particularly there is a place called Velangani. There we have recorded a good interesting results. And here we have opened a pit or a trench. And this trench has got 2 layers. One, the top layer, 37 to 63 centimeter. This is the lithologue of that particular trench. And this layer has got, is yielding the ostracod fauna, shallow marine ostracod fauna. And this layer, this bottom layer also 111 to 130 centimeter layer also gives us the ostracod fauna, which are of marine in nature. But this particular trench is opened 600 meters away from the Velangani coast. So it implies that, it gives an information that this particular shallow, this particular top layer is can be related to the December 2004 tsunami, and this bottom layer we cannot give because we could not get the age. We have collected the samples, but we have submitted to the for the age, for the OSL dating or radiocarbon dating we can get, and thereby we can get the age and we can infer how many hundreds of years ago or how many tens of years ago that tsunami has taken place, and we can find out the paleo tsunami deposit. These are all the ostracod species which we have recorded in those tsunami sediments, Neomonocertina iniqua, Chordates, Javanna, etc. This particular study is also being published. So whatever the research work that I have been carrying out myself and my team, during the past 2.5 decades. And that particular study is, I have given a overview of our osteopod study, starting from freshwater to marginal marine and marine ecosystems of Tamil Nadu coast. Tamil Nadu coast has got about 1,000 kilometer length, and we have made an extensive study on that. That particular paper I have submitted in the, it has been published in the Micropaleontology and its application. The editors are, this is a special book. It is being published in that. And this particular paper is also well appreciated by the USA's scientists in his preface. And as far as finally, the last slide is, finally, as far as osteopods are concerned, there is a vast scope. As such, there are less number of osteopod researchers are there. India has got a coast of 7,500 kilometers, but the study with regard to osteopoda is very, very meager. Except Tamil Nadu coast and few other smaller areas, smaller pockets, the study with regard to osteopods is very meager. And similarly, there are about 26 sedimentary basins, starting from Proterozoic to Mesozoic, Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic up to Karivas. And out of these, except Professor S.B. Bhatia, Professor S.C. Khosla, Professor M.L. Nagori, and from ONGC, D.K. Guha, Anil Bhandari, and few people, other people are there, and M.S. Vanikeri, and Vaidya is there, and other people, they have worked. Only we have the data of Jurassic osteopods from Kutch, and the Cretaceous osteopods from Kaveri Basin, and the tertiary osteopods from subsurface basins of ONGC cores, ONGC boreholes, and also the tertiary osteopods from Quillan beds, Kerala. But for that, many of the basins are unexplored with regard to the osteopods biostratigraphy, as well as paleo-environment, and also with regard to their hydrocarbon potential. And then the functional morphology and biogeochemical and stable isotopic studies. And these are all the potential areas where, with regard to osteopods, can be studied. And with the collection of the deep cores, OSDP and DSDP, ODP cores, we can collect and we can study. And finally, of course, in India or in Asia, we can say that the culturing of foraminifera is at Goa, but the culturing of osteopoda can also be done in order to have a better understanding with the ecological behavior of these osteopods. And finally, this is my last slide. When in the early days of human beings, we were in Stone Age. Later on, due to our intellectual communication, intellectual power, ethics, morality, and we were in the golden age. And the humans, when they when they send the artificial satellites into the space, and we entered into the space age. And as an educated person, as an environmentalist, as a geologist, or as a scientific person, if we don't take proper care of our mother's environment, then we'll be thrown into garbage. So this is my brief insight with regard to the osteopods. Any questions? I am happy to answer